Victor, last year you delivered a TED Talk that discusses the relationship between the physical and digital worlds. Can you unpack a little bit for us Amorphous' unbiased nature and when she eventually transforms herself into Hampton Park?
Sure. When Amorphous is in the orbital part of the Earth, she's kind of in this sense very unbiased. And as she approaches, she becomes beamed with all this information that's being emitted from from the Earth to space, and all of this information are just of pictures and of things that are happening in the present day, and all this information clouds her mind and she becomes nauseous and sinks down to Hampton Park. And it's at this point that she realizes what people are actually doing, and living in relegating all of their memories into a digital format. But over time, she becomes more critical of humans as she realizes that they, in fact, are denying parts of the past that have happened before. And so when she sees this sort of these two conflicting things, the kind of pleasure of the present versus things that have happened in the past, that creates an antagonism for Amorphous, and which leads her to blast this like EMP wave and completely destroy technology that is able to be used in this park. And that's when she starts to begin her transformation to resurface parts of the past into the park, knowing that humans maybe one day they will be able to be in this park and not have to depend on technology to remember things, and to live, to function.
Charleston serves as a critical setting in your story. You actually describe it as a city where histories, events, stories, and people are nearly forgotten. Amorphous experience is actually a profound transformation in Hampton Park, and it seems to almost be what I saw as the climax of your discussion. Why did you choose Charleston, and can this narrative be replicated in another city?
I think that's an interesting question, because Charleston in itself is entirely conflicting in its nature, because it proposes this as a place that is highly beautiful in the sense that it has beautiful architecture and these places that have been that are entirely kind of worth visiting. And the thing is that it's based off of the backbone of kind of exploitative labor and kind of injustice, and to have this sort of happiness and kind of pleasure that is happening in Hampton Park, kind of, to me, well, Amorphous and me, kind of was a sort of a conflicting point. And so in terms of replicating the story of Amorphous in other cities, I think it's entirely applicable in terms of looking critically at what's happened before. Sometimes things have been erased, specifically in the physical environment. So you're left to go to history books or merely recount personal narratives from other people to know what has happened before. In the case of Hampton Park, we have that luxury of being able to look back. My question is, what happens when there isn't a type of physical thing that embodies change? And I think that is the crux at where we are at, where we start to upload the digital information traces of how we are into a cloud rather than the physical environment. And so as this persists, do we become even more detached from our environment and each other?
I'm glad you just brought up the concept of space. I think especially now, seeing how people remember specific events and even how people decide not to remember specific events is an increasingly relevant topic in our time. And you yourself are an architect. You studied undergraduate architecture at Clemson University, and now you're a master's student in architecture at the University of Michigan. Could you just elaborate a little bit on how architecture and good design in general is important in our understanding of Amorphous?
Right. I think to understand that question, we can use Amorphous as a means to look at architecture. And in this case, we can understand Amorphous as a sort of metaphor for looking at how we act in society. So alternate versions of amorphous exist, most notably in the things that we tried to expel from our society to forget our humanity and delay change to occur. Every time we start with a clean slate, we deny amorphous from happening. You see amorphous in the environment, the changing seasons, the shedding skin of a snake, or the tides. A common example are the traces that are left on surfaces, whether the growth of algae on the side of a building or graffiti left by people in an attempt to express themselves. We erase them because we're convinced that we should be clean, pure, and non-changing, but in reality, we shouldn't be erasing the memories we create. But architecturally speaking, amorphous to me is in the nature of adaptive reuse of buildings, in which a place simultaneously retains part of the past, but also suggests a different present day use.
And Victor, could you elaborate just a little bit on your design process?
Sure. The design process was quite tedious because as you design, you're not quite sure where you're going. And for this project in particular, it was a back and forth between writing the narrative and also designing these collages. And I was realized as I'm writing part of the narrative, I'd go back to the collage because I was stuck in the narrative. And I mean, this process, the design process, and any design process for that matter, can be extremely chaotic, especially in the sense that you don't really know what the ending is yet. And especially as a designer, I like to, especially with the collage process, you can put things that are kind of asynchronous and don't belong to each other and kind of figure out a way to put them together.
So you're saying that this is almost like treading into uncharted territory.
Exactly. You kind of like let your mind free and let natural tendencies, things that you've been inspired before, that kind of subconsciously make them way into the drawing himself. In the case of making these collages, I had no idea it would take me where it would take me.
So you embrace the messiness.
I embrace the messiness, and it's extremely anxiety inducing. And so at the end, you may or may not have a complete narrative. I mean, there are gaps in the narrative of Amorphous, and what the future transformation, I have no idea. I think it's just like trying to get at something that kind of physicalizes some thoughts that you have on the way things are going in our society.
Wonderful. Well, Victor, thank you so much for joining us with this discussion. It was great to pick your mind a little bit and to see exactly what your thought process was in delivering this TEDx talk. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ted.